The stagecoach wheel screamed one last time before grinding to a halt in the frozen Montana mud. Elena Blackwood didn't need to look out the window. She could feel the town of Cedar Falls before she saw it. It felt like a held breath, cold and suspicious. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, running from a life of shadows and whispers, toward a man who promised a new beginning, a man who had never seen her face. This was a gamble, and she knew it. The advertisement was simple. Respectable rancher, age 32, seeks bride. Must be of good character, able to work hard. Will provide home and protection. He hadn't asked for a photograph, and she hadn't offered one. Some truths are too sharp for paper. The driver yanked open the door, and the mountain air hit her like a slap. Cedar Falls, miss. End of the line. She gathered her courage, the way a beggar gathers, dropped pennies, and stepped onto the creaking wooden platform. A small crowd was gathered, their faces turned toward her, curious. Among them would be Robert Mitchell, her future, her hope. A man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by sun and wind. This was him. She knew it instantly. He had a look of nervous anticipation, the same look she felt twisting in her own gut. "Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, his voice uncertain but kind. "Mr. Mitchell," she replied, stepping into the light. She extended a gloved hand, the picture of propriety. He moved closer, his own hand rising to meet hers. And that's when it happened. That's when it always happened. The late afternoon sun, weak as it was, broke through the pewter clouds. It sliced across her face, illuminating the one feature she could never hide, the one secret she carried not in her heart, but in her very eyes. She watched his expression shift. It was a terrible, familiar sequence. Polite welcome, confusion, a flicker of disbelief, and then revulsion, raw and ugly. His hand, which had been reaching for hers, dropped to his side like a stone. Every muscle in Elena's body screamed at her to run, to turn back, to disappear. But she had run 2,000 miles already. There was nowhere left to go. She held her ground, her spine a rod of ice. She had lived this moment 1,000 times. The first glance, the horrified double take, the involuntary step backward. Her eyes were wrong. That's what the kind ones said. The unkind ones had other words. Witch, devil, cursed. Her irises weren't a human color. They were a strange liquid gold, an unnerving amber that seemed to shift and glow in the light. And in the bright sun, her pupils would contract, not into pinpricks, but into vertical slits, like a cat or a serpent. "There must be some mistake," Robert Mitchell stammered, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He wasn't looking at her anymore, but at the crowd around them, as if seeking their support, their validation for his horror. "There's no mistake, Mr. Mitchell," Elena said, her voice a marvel of control. "We've corresponded for 3 months. I have your letters right here." He shook his head, a slow, disbelieving motion. The townsfolk had drawn closer now, sensing a drama far more interesting than the arrival of freight. Elena could feel their stares, hot and sharp against her back. You didn't say," he accused, his voice rising. "In your letters. You should have mentioned—" "Mentioned what, Mr. Mitchell?" The challenge slipped out, sharp and dangerous. "That my eyes are unusual? Would you have sent for me if I had?" I can't," he stammered, looking around wildly. "This isn't what I agreed to. I need a proper wife, a normal woman, someone who won't frighten the livestock." "Or the neighbors?" Elena's voice went quiet, but it cut through the cold air. "People will talk," he finished lamely, his face flushed with shame and anger. "I have a reputation. I can't have people thinking I married some kind of, he couldn't say the word. He didn't have to. She'd heard them all before. "I've come 2,000 miles, she said, the simple fact of it a weight between them. "I'll pay for your return passage," and he said, relief flooding his face as he found an easy solution. He was already fumbling for his wallet, desperate to make this problem, this monstrous-eyed woman, disappear. "It's the only decent thing to do. But you can't stay here. Not as my wife. Not looking like that." The money appeared in his hand. a thick wad of bills, more money than she had seen in years. Enough to send her back to the drudgery, the laundries of Philadelphia, where her hands bled into the lie, saving every penny for this single doomed chance. "Keep your money," she said, the words like chips of ice. "Don't be foolish. How will you—" "I said keep it." She turned away from him, from the eager staring faces of the crowd, from the entire shattered dream of a life she had dared to imagine. The weight of her single carpet bag seemed to pull her arm from its socket. "Miss, wait!" he called after her. She didn't stop. She heard his voice justifying himself to the crowd. "I couldn't help it. You saw those eyes. No good Christian man could take a thing like that into his home." Elena walked down the main street of Cedar Falls, a muddy track carved between false-fronted buildings. She had $47 sewn into the lining of her corset and a heart made of lead. The town was supposed to be her new beginning. Instead, it was just another end. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The Montana wind howled around her, whispering a promise of the brutal winter to come. And in the distance, a wolf howled back, a lonely, wild sound. For the first time, Elena thought she understood what it was saying. It was a cry that said, "I am what I am, and I am alone." The boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. The landlady, a woman with a face so tight it looked painful, took one look at Elena's eyes and her price doubled. $2 in advance, out by sunrise. It was robbery, a week's wages for a lumpy mattress and a cracked water basin. But Elena saw the finality in the woman's gaze. It was this, or a night in the street. She paid, the clink of coins sealing her fate for the night. The room was a closet with a window. From it she could see the men gathering outside the saloon, their voices carrying on the cold air. The story was already spreading, growing teeth and claws with each retelling. "Saw her myself. Eyes like a damn cougar. Mitchell did right sending her packing. Things unnatural." Elena pulled the thin curtains, shutting out the town that had rejected her so completely. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. 5 minutes to grieve the husband she'd never have, the home that had vanished before her eyes, the children who would never be born. 5 minutes to feel the crushing weight of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. Then she stood up. She dried her eyes, her face a mask of cold resolve. She had survived 28 years of this. She had survived the stones of children, the exorcisms of priests, the pity of lonely women, and the fear of superstitious men. She would survive Cedar Falls. Somehow, she had 3 days until the next stagecoach headed east. 3 days to figure out a plan. Returning to Philadelphia wasn't a plan, it was a surrender. And Elena Blackwood had forgotten how to surrender. Dawn arrived gray and grudging. The landlady was waiting by the door, arms crossed, as if to physically bar Elena from staying a second past sunrise. "Stage back east is on Thursday," the woman said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "The hotel might take you, or the church. Reverend Dawson sometimes helps. Unfortunates." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Elena stepped out into the frozen morning. The Frontier House Hotel was her first stop, a 2-story building that pretended to be grand. The man behind the desk was dozing. When she cleared her throat, he jerked awake, blinking. His eyes focused on her face and his expression soured. "You're the one," he said. Not a question. "Mitchell's mail-order bride." "I need a room for 3 nights, Elena said, placing $1 on the counter. "We're full up." He didn't even look at the register book, which lay open and mostly empty. "Your sign says you have vacancies." "Sign's old," he lied without blinking. He pushed the dollar back toward her. "Besides, this is a respectable place. We don't take in your kind." The insult was so casual, so expected, it barely stung. She picked up her dollar with a steady hand. Back on the street, the cold seemed to bite deeper. The church, the landlady had said. But Elena knew better. Sometimes the cruelest judgments were wrapped in piety. She was standing there, a solitary statue of despair, when a voice cut through the morning quiet. "You looking for somewhere to stay?" The woman stood in the doorway of the Mercantile. She was middle-aged, with steel-gray hair, and a face that looked like it had argued with the prairie wind and won. An apron was tied around her practical brown dress. "Mrs. Hartley," the sign read. I saw what happened at the depot, the woman said, her expression unreadable. And I heard Jake at the hotel turn you away. He's a fool. A tiny fragile flicker of hope ignited in Elena's chest. Do you know of a place? Mrs. Hartley's gaze was direct. She didn't look away from Elena's eyes. She studied them, a long, unnerving moment of scrutiny. Lord have mercy, the woman breathed, not in fear, but in something like awe. They really are like a cat's. Yes, Elena said, her voice flat. They are. Must have been hard, Mrs. Hartley said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Then she sighed. There's a widow, Sarah Brennan, lives above the bakery. She's got a spare room she rents out. She needs the money bad enough she might overlook. Well, she might overlook a lot of things. The kindness, however pragmatic, was so unexpected, Elena felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Hartley said, her face grim. And a word of advice. Stay out of the saloon after dark. The miners get ideas about women who look different. The bakery was a haven of warmth and the scent of fresh bread. The woman behind the counter was small and wiry, with faded red hair and flour dusting her hands. Sarah Brennan. She looked up, and Elena saw the now familiar wave of shock and fear wash over her face. I suppose Mary Hartley sent you, she said, her voice tight. She said you might have a room. Sarah Brennan came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She moved closer, her gaze fixed on Elena's face. Let me see. Elena stood her ground, chin high. In the warm light of the bakery, her eyes would be a startling molten gold. Sarah didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. My husband died 2 years back, she said, her voice clipped. Left me this shop and a mountain of debt. I got 2 children to feed. She took a deep breath. It's $2 a week, paid in advance. You use the back stairs only. You don't come in the shop during business hours. And if anyone asks, you're my cousin from Chicago. Come to help with the baking. No one will believe that, Elena said. No, Sarah agreed, a bitter smile twisting her lips. They won't. But it gives us both something to pretend, doesn't it? The room was small but clean. It had a real bed and a window that overlooked an alley. It felt like a palace. Sarah hesitated at the door. My children, they're good kids, but they talk. When they're home, you stay in this room. Understood? Elena understood perfectly. The honesty of children could cut deeper than any adult's malice. Alone, she unpacked her few belongings. From the window, she could see the town moving, living, breathing without her. Then she heard voices from the street below. 2 women. Saw her myself, bold as brass. Jake said her eyes actually glow, like a cat's in the dark. Robert Mitchell's a lucky man. Imagine waking up next to that in the middle of the night. They laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Elena stepped back from the window, her hands trembling not with hurt, but with a cold, hard rage she had learned to push down deep inside her. She had 3 days. 3 days to decide. Run back to a life she knew, or find a way to carve out a place in this one, a place that wanted nothing to do with her. The town of Cedar Falls didn't know it yet, but Elena Blackwood was done with running. For 3 days, Elena existed in the margins. She was a ghost in Sarah Brennan's house, using the back stairs, staying in her room, listening to the town's muffled heartbeat through the floorboards. On the 3rd night, a crisis struck. Sarah ran out of flour. The mercantile was closed. The only place in town that might have some to spare was the one place Elena had been warned to avoid, the Silver Dollar Saloon. She pulled her shawl tight, pulling her bonnet low, and slipped into the night. She just needed to get to the back door, to ask the proprietor. She wouldn't even have to go inside. But she miscalculated. Well, well, what have we here? 3 men blocked the muddy street, miners. Their clothes were stiff with grime, their faces rough, their eyes glinting in the lantern light. The man who spoke swayed, the smell of cheap whiskey rolling off him. Excuse me, Elena said, trying to step around them, her eyes fixed on the ground. Hold on there, missy. Another one blocked her path. You're the one Mitchell sent packing, the one with the devil eyes. Please, let me pass. Please, the first one mocked. Such a polite little witch. Come on, let's have a look. A hand shot out, grabbing for her bonnet. Elena jerked back. But it was too late. They had her surrounded. The street was dark and empty. No one would help her. She knew this with the bone-deep certainty of long experience. The bonnet was ripped from her head. Her golden hair tumbled down as she was forced to look up. For a long second, the men just stared, their drunken bravado evaporating. The lantern light caught her eyes, making them flash, predatory and wild. Jesus Christ, one of them whispered, taking a step back. Which eyes, the leader breathed, his fear quickly curdling into a more dangerous anger. Satan's mark. Maybe she put a curse on Mitchell. That's why he couldn't go through with it. I've done nothing to you, Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. Let me go. Or what? A hand grabbed her arm, fingers digging in like claws. You'll curse us too? Maybe we should see if she floats, another one snarled. Like they did back in Salem. That's when a new voice cut through the darkness. It was quiet, but it carried an authority that made the miners freeze. That's enough. A man emerged from the shadows between two buildings. He was tall and broad, dressed in worn leather and canvas, and he held a rifle in his hands as if it were an extension of his arm. He wasn't pointing it at anyone, but its presence was a promise. This ain't your business, Harper, the lead miner, Tom, growled, but the aggression in his voice was gone, replaced by a nervous respect. Samuel Harper. Elena had heard the name whispered. The hunter who lived alone in the mountains. The man who'd lost his family to fever and had gone half wild with grief. The town's other outcast. I'm making it my business, Harper said, his voice flat. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, found Elena's. She saw surprise in them, but not the revulsion she expected. Not even fear. Just a steady, unnerving assessment. Let her go. She's a witch. Look at her eyes. I am looking, Harper said. His gaze held hers, direct and unwavering. All I see is a woman being harassed by three drunken fools. Tom's hand drifted toward the pistol at his belt. You taking her side against your own kind, Harper? The rifle in Harper's hands shifted, a tiny, deadly movement. Try me and find out. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, 3 against 1. But the one was Samuel Harper, and his reputation was worth more than a dozen extra men. Tom's hand dropped from his gun. This ain't over, he spat. Yes, Harper said, his voice like the closing of a tomb. It is. The miners shuffled away, casting hateful looks over their shoulders. Harper waited until they were gone before lowering the rifle. He turned to Elena. You hurt? No, she said, retrieving her bonnet, her hands trembling. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, his gaze open and studying her. They'll remember this. Tom Brennan holds a grudge. He paused. They're right about one thing, though. Elena braced herself. Your eyes, he said, his voice matter of fact. They're unusual, beautiful even, like a hawk's or a cougar's, like something that belongs to the mountains, not to a town full of fools. The word hung in the air between them, beautiful. When was the last time anyone had called her beautiful? She couldn't remember. I should go, she managed, her voice thick. I'll walk you back, he said. It wasn't a request. They walked in silence, a strange pair of outcasts under the cold Montana moon. At the bakery's back door, she turned to him. Why did you help me? He considered the question for a long moment. Maybe because I know what it's like to have people look at you and see a monster. He met her eyes again. They're wrong about you, and they were wrong about me. Before she could ask what he meant, he touched the brim of his hat. Think hard before you get on that stagecoach, Miss Blackwood. Some things don't belong in a cage. Maybe the mountains would suit you better than you know. He melted back into the shadows, leaving Elena with a racing heart and a head full of impossible thoughts. The mountains. A man who saw beauty where others saw a curse. For the first time since arriving in this God-forsaken town, a wild, dangerous seed of hope began to sprout in the frozen landscape of her heart. The knock on her door came before dawn. It was soft, but insistent. Elena opened it to find Samuel Harper standing there, his hat in his hands, his winter sky eyes serious. Miss Blackwood, he said, sorry for the early hour. Is something wrong? Depends on your point of view, he said, his voice grim. I was at the saloon late. Couldn't sleep. heard Tom Brennan and his friends talking. They weren't just drunk, they were being stirred up. Stirred up by who? Reverend Dawson, Harper said, and Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The good Reverend's been preaching about the devil walking in our midst, about a serpent in the garden. He didn't use your name, but everyone knew who he meant. Tom and his boys are planning to cleanse the town of your presence tonight. Cleanse. The word was so sterile, so pious. It meant tar and feathers. It meant a rope. It meant a fire. The sheriff, she started. Won't do a thing, Harper cut her off. Says it's a matter for the church. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. She was trapped. The town, led by its holy man, was going to destroy her. I didn't come just to warn you, Harper said, his gaze intense. I came to offer you another choice. What choice? Come with me, up to my cabin, just for a few days until things cool down, until you can get on that stage safely. He saw the hesitation in her face and added quickly, I have a separate room. It was my daughter's. You'd be safe there, I swear it. Go into the wilderness with a man she barely knew, a half-wild hermit with a past full of ghosts? But the alternative was to stay here and face a mob fueled by righteousness and whiskey. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why are you doing this? My wife, he said, and the name seemed to pain him. She was Shoshone. The town, they never let her forget she was different. They smiled to her face and whispered behind her back. They called her a heathen, a savage. They looked at her with the same fear they look at you with. His jaw tightened. I didn't stand up for her enough. I let their whispers get inside my own head. I won't make that mistake again. I see them sharpening their knives for you, and I see a chance to do what I should have done for her. The confession was raw, painful, and utterly convincing. He wasn't saving her out of pity. He was saving her out of a deep personal penance. 5 minutes later, she was packed. Sarah Brennan met her in the kitchen, pressing a bundle of food into her hands. You be careful, the older woman whispered, her eyes full of fear. Harper's a good man, I think, but the mountains are no place for a woman alone. I won't be alone, Elena said. They left Cedar Falls as the sun was rising, 2 horses climbing the winding trail into the pines. Elena looked back once. The town was a collection of small, angry boxes below. She felt no regret, only the cold thrill of escape. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The world expanded into a breathtaking vista of peaks and valleys. Here, among the ancient trees and silent rocks, no one stared. The mountain didn't judge. The cabin was nestled in a high meadow with a view that stole her breath. It was sturdy, built of thick logs with a curl of smoke already rising from its stone chimney. I banked the fire before I left, Samuel explained. Didn't want you walking into a cold house. The inside was one large room, clean and orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. It was the home of a man who lived a solitary, purposeful life. Your room's through there, he said, pointing to a closed door. It was my daughter's. I haven't changed anything. Elena pushed the door open. The room was small, with a narrow bed covered by a colorful quilt. On a shelf sat a wooden horse, a corn husk doll, a child's picture book. The air was thick with the ghost of a life cut short. Her name was Mary, Samuel said from the doorway, his voice rough. She would have been 9 this year. He cleared his throat, pushing past the pain. There's a trunk, my wife's clothes. You're about her size. Use whatever you need. The simple, practical offer, layered over such profound grief, made Elena's eyes sting. Alone, she sat on the small bed, overwhelmed. A week ago, she'd been a mail-order bride. Now she was a fugitive, hiding in a dead child's room, her only protector a widower haunted by his own ghosts. She unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 2 mended dresses next to the clothes of a woman she would never know. They ate in silence by the fire, the vast wilderness pressing in against the windows. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was a shared space, a mutual understanding of sorrow. Samuel, she said finally, you said they were wrong about you too. What did you mean? He stared into the fire for a long time. The fever that took Margaret and Mary, it swept through the valley. But it hit us first. Dr. Morrison was out of town. I did what I could. Used Margaret's people's medicine, poultices, herbs, but it wasn't enough. He took a shaky breath. When the doc got back, he said my savage remedies probably made it worse. The story got around. People started saying I killed them, that the Shoshone spirits I'd brought into my house had taken their revenge. It was easier than admitting a fever could just kill people. Easier than admitting they were helpless. Now she understood. He wasn't just an outcast by choice. He was an exile. They had taken his family, and then they had taken his name. He and Elena were more alike than she could have imagined. They were both marked, branded by the town's fear of the unknown. That night, a storm rolled in. Snow began to fall, soft and silent at first, then harder, a thick white curtain dropping over the world, sealing them in. "Looks like you're not going anywhere for a while," Samuel said, watching the blizzard from the window. "The pass will be closed for a week, maybe more." Elena looked at the swirling snow, at the fire crackling in the hearth, at the quiet, sorrowful man who had offered her shelter. Trapped. She should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in her entire life, she felt something astonishing. She felt safe. The days of the storm bled one into the next. The world shrank to the four walls of the cabin, the crackle of the fire, and the steady presence of the man across the room. They fell into a rhythm. She cooked, he chopped wood. She mended his clothes, he cleaned his rifle. They talked. They told stories of their pasts, laying out the broken pieces of their lives on the rough-hewn table between them. He told her about Margaret, her laugh, her fierce love for the mountains. He told her about Mary, a little girl with her mother's spirit who was fascinated by stories of magic. "That picture book," he said one evening, nodding toward her room. "It was her favorite. About a lost princess who finds her way home through a dark forest. She's guided by a golden light." He stared into the flames. "Mary always said the light in the pictures looked like cat's eyes. She said they weren't scary. She said they were beautiful. Said they could see in the dark and help you find your way." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Samuel looked up, his gaze meeting hers across the firelit room. Funny how children see things so clearly sometimes. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken words. He had seen more than just an outcast at the stagecoach depot. In her cursed eyes, he had seen the echo of his daughter's favorite story. He had seen a guiding light, not a mark of the devil. The storm broke on the fifth day. The world outside was a pristine, silent wilderness of white. But the storm inside the cabin was just beginning. Standing close by the fire, the silence stretching between them, Samuel reached out, his calloused fingers barely grazing her cheek. "Your eyes," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "In this light, they're like honey and flame." "People say," she started. "I know what people say," he interrupted, his voice fierce. "People are fools. They see different and they think dangerous. They don't know that different can be exactly what you've been looking for." The moment was shattered by a sound from outside. Not the wind, not an animal, shouting. Samuel was at the window in an instant, rifle in hand. His body went rigid. "They're here." Elena looked past his shoulder. A line of dark figures was struggling through the deep snow of the meadow. 7 of them. They carried rifles, and one of them, at the front, carried a torch, its flame a vicious orange gash against the snow. It was Tom Brennan, and with him was the Reverend Dawson, and behind them, his face pale and set, was Robert Mitchell. The groom who had rejected her. They had come to finish what they started. The cleansing had begun. "Stay in the bedroom," Samuel ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Bar the door." "No," Elena said, moving to stand beside him. Her terror was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but a new feeling was rising to meet it, a defiant rage. "They came for me. I won't hide." Samuel looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a flicker of fierce pride. He nodded once. The pounding on the door began, heavy and violent. "Harper, we know she's in there. Send out the witch." "There's no witch here," Samuel called back, his voice ringing with authority. "Only my guest, in my home. You're trespassing." We are doing the Lord's work, the Reverend's voice boomed. We've come to cast out the evil you are harboring. The only evil I see is a mob of cowards with guns, threatening an unarmed woman, Samuel shot back. He looked at Elena. Together? She nodded, her hand finding his. Together. He unbarred the door and threw it open. They stood together on the threshold, framed against the firelight, facing the half-circle of armed men. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright on the snow. In that fierce light, Elena's eyes seemed to catch fire, glowing with an impossible molten gold. One of the men gasped. Look at them. They glow. Don't let her bewitch you, Tom Brennan snarled, but his voice shook. She's not doing anything, Samuel said, his voice carrying across the snow-filled meadow. You're just seeing what I see. Beauty you're too scared to understand, so you call it evil. The Bible says, the Reverend began. The Bible says, judge not, Samuel cut him off. It says, love thy neighbor. It says, perfect love casts out fear. But you're all about fear, aren't you, Reverend? Scared of a woman because God didn't make her eyes the same color as yours. He scanned the faces of the men. Some of you remember my wife, Margaret. You remember how you whispered about her. And my grandmother before her. This town has a long history of fearing what it doesn't understand. His voice dropped, but it lost none of its power. You want to know what I see when I look at this woman? I see courage. I see kindness. I see someone who traveled 2,000 miles for a new life, only to be met by your hatred, and she's still standing, still facing you with more dignity than the whole lot of you put together. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably, but Tom Brennan's hatred was a hard, stubborn thing. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Elena's heart. Enough talk. If you won't give her to us, we'll take her. Suddenly, a new voice rang out, sharp and commanding, from the edge of the woods. You put that rifle down, Tom Brennan, or so help me God, I'll put you down. Everyone turned. Standing at the tree line, a shotgun held steady in her hands, was Mrs. Hartley from the Mercantile, and behind her, holding old hunting rifles, were Sarah Brennan and two other townswomen Elena didn't recognize. Mary Hartley, what in God's name? The Reverend sputtered. I'll tell you what, Mrs. Hartley said, taking a step forward into the meadow, her boots sinking into the snow. I'm sick and tired of you men and your pathetic fears. You bring shame on Cedar Falls. Harassing a woman, led by a preacher who's forgotten the meaning of charity and a jilted fool who's afraid of a pretty face. She fixed Robert Mitchell with a glare so hot he visibly wilted. We came to protect our town, Tom insisted. From what? Sarah Brennan demanded, her voice shaking with rage. From a woman who has done nothing but seek shelter? You're not protectors, you're bullies, and we're done with it. The standoff had shifted. It was no longer a mob against two outcasts. It was the men of the town against its women. The men looked at each other, their resolve crumbling under the fiery scorn of their wives and neighbors. One by one, they lowered their rifles. Tom Brennan stood alone, his gun still raised, his face a mask of fury and confusion. This ain't over, he spat, finally lowering his weapon. Oh, yes, it is, Mrs. Hartley said, her shotgun never wavering. Now get off this mountain, and if I ever hear of any of you bothering this couple again, you'll be dealing with me. They left, a defeated, shamed procession trudging back through the snow. Robert Mitchell didn't even look back. When they were gone, the silence in the meadow was absolute. Elena's knees finally gave out. Samuel caught her, holding her tight. It's over, he whispered into her hair. You're safe. Over the snow, Mrs. Hartley called out, a rare smile on her weathered face. Looks like you two could use some flour. I brought extra. Spring melted the last of the snow from the high meadow. With it came a change in Cedar Falls. The story of the standoff on the mountain had spread, and the tale had turned Mrs. Hartley and the other women into legends. The men of the mob became figures of ridicule. Tom Brennan, unable to live down the shame, had packed up and left for the Nevada mines. Elena and Samuel came down from the mountain for the first time in 4 months. They walked into the Mercantile holding hands. The whispers that followed them now were different. Not of fear, but of awe. They were no longer the town's outcasts. They were a story. a legend of their own. But the real test came a week later. A fever swept through the town, the same kind that had taken Samuel's family. It struck the Reverend Dawson's house first, laying his youngest daughter low. The doctor was miles away, and the girl was fading fast. The Reverend prayed, he fasted, he begged God for a miracle. But the fever only worsened. In desperation, his wife ran to the one person in town who might know a different kind of healing. She ran to Elena. Elena found the girl burning up, her breathing shallow. In the corner, the Reverend was on his knees, his Bible clutched in his hands, his face a mask of helpless agony. He looked up as Elena entered, and in his eyes she saw not hatred, but a desperate, broken plea. Elena went to work. Using the knowledge passed down from her own grandmother and the Shoshone remedies Samuel had taught her, she brewed willow bark tea and applied cool compresses. She worked through the night, Samuel by her side, while the Reverend and his wife watched in silent, prayerful tension. Toward dawn, the fever broke. The little girl opened her eyes, clear and lucid, and asked for a drink of water. The Reverend sobbed, not with piety, but with a raw, shuddering relief. He rose to his feet and walked over to Elena. He stood before her, the great booming man of God, now humbled and small. My daughter, he started, his voice thick. She'll be fine, Elena said softly. She just needs rest. He looked at her then, truly looked at her impossible golden eyes, the eyes he had called a mark of Satan. They are not the mark of the devil, he whispered, his voice full of a terrible, newfound wonder. They are the eyes of an angel. From that day on, everything was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a grudging respect that slowly blossomed into true acceptance. Elena, the woman with the devil eyes, became the town's healer. Samuel, the haunted hermit, became her husband, his quiet strength a shield at her side. They expanded the garden on the mountain, and their produce was the most sought after in the valley. They rebuilt Samuel's life, and in doing so, built a new one for themselves. The cabin was no longer a refuge from the world, but a home, filled with the warmth of a love that had been forged in fear and tempered in defiance. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear over the jagged peaks. The lights of Cedar Falls twinkled in the valley below, no longer a threat, but a community they were a part of. A wolf howled in the distance, its wild call echoing through the mountains. Elena leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. She no longer envied the wolf its freedom. She had found her own. She had discovered that true belonging wasn't about being the same as everyone else. It was about finding the one person, the one place where your own unique, different, beautiful self was finally seen and finally truly loved. Her eyes, which had been her curse for so long, had become her gift. They had allowed her to see through the darkness of prejudice, and they had guided a good man back into the light. They were, she finally understood, the eyes that could see the way home. Thank you for listening to this story of courage and love in the Old West. What did you think of Elena's journey from outcast to hero? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It means the world to me. Until next time, stay safe out there.